But you know what? Let's see. I've got this title screen I made. Can you see it on the stream?
Oh, let me pull the stream up. Hold up.
Actually, I wanted to talk about this. You can't see the toolbar, but there's an item. All right, tell me when you see it.
I'm watching an ad.
Oh,
Fuckers.
sweet. What is it for? Is it a gaming ad?
Duracell.
Okay, you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's interesting because Weekly was made with this. But actually, so this was the feature that I was always kind of looking for in a note-taking app, and then this one has this feature, and I didn't even realize it until now. But so normally you draw on with a pen, you know, you kind of do whatever, and it kind of smooths it out. Like, it doesn't look like super jaggedy. I think even if it does, well, maybe it's not doing that. Yeah, it's got a lot of detail. Oh shit, it's not actually showing that now. The funny thing is that this thing doesn't tell me when it's not updating. All right, so I've been doing drawing stuff here on the screen. So I'm doing little shapes or curlies, but if I want to do shapes, you know, if I were to do a square, you know, I could get good at kind of doing a square or a box, but fucking look at this tool. Boom.
Awesome.
Oh, it's cut off on this side. There we go.
Oh, I see it. I see it full.
So.
Oh, that one's cut off.
And
oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's really, really great for. It always thinks things are circles, though. Fucking. All right. Well, it's a thing that you have to kind of get. Fuck. God. Whatever. But yeah.
That's
so
neat.
Anyway, that's fun.
Does it? So it works with text as well.
Well, it kind of does. Like, I did the text program. And some shapes, like a lot of round shapes, it just is like, oh, you're trying to do a circle. So I'm like, no. Some of the letters I had to go back to the regular pen to do. The S in Steve down here. You can see I did it in 3 strokes because I was like, stop making a circle. But when it does do a circle like that, those zeros for the number, it's like, oh, that's a good looking circle. Anyway, I always wanted this. I'm glad I have it now. And maybe I'll even use this for some diagramming today.
Awesome.
I don't know. All right, we're back to your cat background.
Yeah.
All right, what's up? Do we do a index of what we're gonna try and cover?
Oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Yeah, I wonder if you could obs it,
shit.
you know, or you could visualize it in another way.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess I'll just share the fucking screen.
Dang.
I'm also trying to like see the chat and not put something in front of your window. All right.
Well, if you have to cover me up, I understand.
Big thing that I was working on this week was the Visual Studio Code, VS Code extension, mainly the inspector. I actually have a demo for that, so I can show that. Looks like
what? Oh shit! Love it.
Unraid
nice.
Machine was I have a quick update on that. Financing, quick update. Documentary. I guess we could talk about the background, what you're doing. And then I like this share a book or article. I have one in mind, I think.
Awesome.
And then we're gonna try and come up with some targets for next week. Should we try and do this in what, 50 minutes?
Sure. Sounds good.
All right. What first?
I guess with the VS Code extension, I'm super stoked to see this demo. I had seen you working on it during the week, but I'd only drop in for like just a short period of time.
Yeah. All right. Let me give a little explanation first. So, this tool that we're building, Tractor, is a programming environment, and it, in a way, is kind of like it does what Unity does, in that it provides a sort of editor-like thing for assembling systems, basically. But it also needs to let you code, so it's also an editor. But there are certain aspects that have to be customized. It's kind of like a custom little IDE. So I started out, actually a long time ago, this is why I was working on Go, WASM stuff, because I was trying to figure out how to do this in a way that was not insane, which basically meant not using JavaScript. And I kept going back and forth between, should I do this in Go? Should I do this in React? And at one point, I switched back to React, and I got basically this far in building enough of a prototype that it's actually talking to a backend, and there's some nodes, and there are these components that you can add that are basically classes. And if I were to edit those classes, which I would do out of band because I didn't have a good enough editor working in this interface. So if I were to edit stuff out of band in another editor, these fields would update. I could change these things. This code is all running. So, I could, this button would execute the hello method on that class. Like these are being reflected structs in Go. And so it's basically any data structure in Go can be visualized here, or that's the idea. And then you can interact with it. This console was kind of a big deal. I figured actually that there was something like I wanted some kind of immediate interactive thing. And so we'll come back to the console thing, but the idea here was that it was something that you could interact with the tree with. I don't know what the API would be, but root, I don't know, node A. So you could interact with stuff this way pretty easily. Maybe there's a current node context, so you can interact with these, and just do arbitrary computation. This was also a log, but also I wanted to work kind of like tonic dev runkit, right? And some other kind of like notebook or journaling things where they visualize certain types in an interactive way. I guess you have to look at the stream to see what I was showing on the screen, but runkit visualizes the results that you get in a somewhat interactive way, which or in a more interactive way. Another good console that I like is the DevTools console. It's got autocomplete, it's got filtering. If you do have an object, you're able to interactively browse it, and so that's kind of something that I want to have in this console. And also the idea almost that the console could be like a meta console, like you could easily run a shell command from here as well, but we'll see. So anyway, that's kind of more talking about stuff that doesn't exist yet, but just to provide some more context, as we're getting closer, I can kind of like describe specifics. So this worked, but then I stopped working on it, and then I came back to it, and I was like, oh, I should update some stuff, some packages, and that broke everything. And so then, I was spending some time this was the other week, trying to figure out like, what the hell should I do? Should I continue wasting time dealing with the mess of React and Webpack and all these dependencies? Should I invest in Go? I came back to a brilliant idea, which was to do it as an extension of VS Code. I was familiar with some of the extension points and the architecture of VS Code, which I like more than, say, Atom. They're both based on Electron, which is not ideal for me, but is a fine starting point for building building something that people can use.
Absolutely.
And so let me see if it's running. I wonder if there's an easier way for you to see my screen. I don't know if you see my screen though.
I'm just watching the stream.
Okay, so it's probably a little behind, but so here's the idea. This is the editor running the plugin. I've customized it to more or less like hide the other activities. So there's a new activity here called tractor. And then there's the hierarchy view, and this is actually talking to the same backend as this one over here. There's no functionality. I can't like move things or add nodes. The thing that I worked on this week that basically put it all together was this inspector. And so there wasn't any good sort of like component that I could extend in VS Code to do this inspector. Maybe this tree view, but the tree view is kind of limited that they give you access to than what they have in the other parts of the app. For example, you can't do drag and drop. Like the file explorer lets you move files around, move this in here, move it out of here. But they have no like API to implement that in your own trees, in your extension. So you're pretty limited to what you can do, what they expose. The one thing that they do expose is a web view tab, and so you can kind of make a new tab or a new kind of editor that is just a HTML thing. So then I came back to, well, how do I so this solves part of it, but I still have to pick a web framework to build this component in. I wanted to, the development workflow of doing a VS Code extension is really nice. It's like doing a regular web page. You can just kind of hit reload and look back and see the difference. And it doesn't feel like I'm running Webpack and it's running all these like compilation steps and stuff. So feels pretty fast. I ended up building it with React, but sort of loading it in the page, from a CDN, and tried to set it up so that I don't have any kind of compile step.
Love it.
Which also means it has Babel on the page. So it's basically doing it on the fly. So it's kind of doing the same thing that it would if it was like a node thing, because it's going to go run it through Babel and stuff like that. But it's doing it sort of behind the scenes on demand, and I'm not running another process and all this stuff. So it just feels a lot more lightweight. Anyway, we got to a point where there's a inspector that more or less works like the last, like the old prototype. And that I also got to refactor the components and simplified it, and so that's really great. And solved a design problem, one of which is that almost every field can have an expression in the same way that spreadsheets do, so it's like, you could say equals. Actually, I can't edit anything here, but you could imagine saying, instead of a static value, I want this to equal this value from this other node, and maybe in a little string expression, string interpolation or something. So you can do dynamic values, and then that will automatically update as other values update in the hierarchy. And so that's a separate input than the value. And so I was playing with some stuff in the old prototype on how to get to that. In this one, I just made a simple kind of like expression button toggle on the right. And so the expression toggle will let you write whatever expression that you want to use for that value. None of it works yet, but it is ready to be wired up.
Nice.
And that's mostly it. There's also it's not really doing anything yet, but I wanted to do this console, right? And it's probably going to be kind of a custom thing to do it the way I want, make it interactive. Unfortunately, how would we do that here? We'd have to do it as another web view, and then it's up here. I don't know. Can you put tabs down here? No. So we're kind of limited by some of the constraints of the editor, although I talked to a couple people this week that might be interested in helping with the VS Code code base to do some customizations. But in the meantime, I have a setup where I can do basically do a REPL program that will represent this console, because this is actually executed on the server side anyway. And so this is just a little thin client. It won't be able to do, interactive stuff because this is just a dumb terminal. But it's a start. So anyway, that's awesome. It feels like I guess I'm really excited now, because it's kind of feels like when I had this, I was kind of excited, but I just didn't look forward to all the jank. Like, I'm going to have to write an editor, and that's going to suck because that's really boring. And like it's not just like a simple thing. Now that I'm in VS Code, I don't have to worry about that at all. And I get all these other kind of new functionalities and things to play with. And I think the other thing is this is a great example of what I want this tool to enable, which is repurposing things. It's like, this is a great interface. Can I repurpose it for something else? And at some point, this is a tool that should let you extend and integrate systems, in a way that would let you more easily repurpose systems for other things. I'll get to some examples when I have demos, but
honestly, it seems like a natural extension of VS Code itself, what you're doing. But like, as soon as I started to,
it starts making it look like an IDE, which is, basically the direction you would imagine VS Code to go. But the thing is that this is an IDE. It looks like an IDE for code, but it's IDE for a very, particular kind of code that's based around this data structure and this paradigm of components that you can add to nodes. But otherwise, it is just kind of a general purpose programming environment, which is cool. And eventually, that's going to be something that will let you build and assemble systems in any language, even though it's mostly Go right now. So that's that. That part of the update, I guess. Let's see here. Okay. So that took 20 minutes.
Well, that's the really important one. Everything else is bullshit. So.
Do you want to talk about that more, or do you want to get through some other stuff first?
Yeah, let's just keep moving on, and then near the end, I'm sure there will be time to ask questions and stuff.
The Unraid project. Let's see. I'm still waiting to find out what USB controller to get, because that is preventing me from using my audio interface, which is preventing me from using it for Logic, which was basically the number one thing that I need to use it for, because I'm sort of capped on my utilization of this machine, especially for streams. And then the other thing,
let me show you something.
Yeah.
Your
green screen is
oh god, it's fucking no more green screen. There we go.
Oh shit.
What's it doing?
I like this though.
I think it's actually working. I like this. This is great. Okay. Oh my god. Okay, this is serious. This is serious bug. Okay, there we go. So just to give you some updates.
So this is your machine, which actually looks a lot like my machine, if anybody remembers and is confused.
Yeah, so here we go. So everyone online is like, hey, the company that makes a card that works 100% for 4 unique USB controllers per card is this card by Allegro. Um, and Allegro basically discontinued that card. It's like great. So I bought the single USB controller version, and this one works perfectly. Works absolutely wonderfully. Um, I had tried another card that God, I can't even remember the brand. Um, it was an as media controller, and it didn't work. It was not even compatible with the system.
Mm-hmm.
Then I tried this other controller by StarTech that has 4 USB controllers per, so one controller per port, and it works. You can pass through the card, everything shows up, but devices are not usable, which is really strange. And that happens for both Linux and Windows.
So this is kind of
So
an unresolved community thing.
yeah,
Like there
yeah,
isn't a
which is why
solution.
I haven't like given you a recommendation yet. If you want a stopgap, that Allegro card will definitely work and works great. It's what I use in my Mac VM right now, which is doing the editing of
Okay, so
the doc.
yeah, it's not like a solution for like going forward, but it would be a solution for my particular machine.
Yeah, it's like a temporary solution.
Well, because you think it might lose support at some point, like stop working at some point.
Oh, the Allegro card?
Yeah.
No, the Allegro card will work, but it's a single controller, so you're just
Yeah.
stuck passing
Yeah.
through every single port to
I
one.
see.
Which right now is fine. But could be better.
Can you bring your cat background back up?
Yeah, of course. Of course. Well, maybe I'll try something slightly different. Here we go. Honestly, I loved. Is that baby? Like I heard that like hesitation. Is
Yeah,
that baby?
because
Here we
it
go.
kind of looks
Maybe
like a
this one.
mess.
It's called
Bug.
artistic. Okay. Here we go. Here's another
I mean,
cat photo I
Bug
did.
already looks like a mess though. So
Here we go. Green screen. Boom. I just draw cat photos all day.
perfect. Okay, but the one thing that I wanted to do with the Unraid machine that I can do, I have everything for it, is run a VM that streams Program TV on a new Twitch account. So I was going to set up Program TV, so there would be 2 streams, and then Program TV can run on that one.
Nice.
I also have a bunch of new stuff on that playlist too, so. But
I did come across a workflow that I'm using now for doing like automatic backups of your VMs, the XMLs, and then the image itself.
mm-hmm.
So I've started doing that.
Where is it? And it backs it up to the disk array?
Yeah, to the array. Yeah. And then you just have a folder that's dated. So.
Is it a binary diff? Like, how does it store the snapshots of the disk image?
So the disk itself is like a additional sort of manual operation that I'm doing, where I just literally am like copying over the image.
Okay.
And I'm replacing the image that's there. I'm not like using the power of Btrfs or anything like that because I'm moving it to the slow array.
Yeah.
But I'm doing this like because I really hit a moment in my sort of creation or my creators VM, I'll call it, my Mac OS High Sierra VM, where it's like perfect. Everything is installed, everything works great, everything's awesome. I'm like, okay, I need to back it up now. I don't want to fuck it up.
Yeah.
Because the idea of like never having to reinstall plugins for Logic and stuff is like,
I mean, what you should be doing is trying to automate that setup process?
Oh, like so it can automatically install
So
everything.
you can always just
Um,
start over.
you know, there I've seen some scripts where people do that with their development environments, where it's like with a fresh install, here's this massive script that installs Brew and everything like that. And I would love that. If everything was more package managery in a way, or if
Mm-hmm.
like where things came from were more programmable,
Yeah.
that would be incredible.
Yeah. Interesting. It's creating ideas. Let's move on. It's dangerous. Uh, Financing, which used to be real estate, which doesn't have an update other than I put, last week I talked about uh, the what was it? Fundrise, um, which I decided talking to my finance team friends, colleagues. They we kind of realized, oh, instead of doing this apartment complex thing that I was gonna do for now, especially given my situation in terms of like trying to find cash flow and stuff like that, and not having income, so working with banks is a little difficult because it's all capped. That this is actually a pretty reasonable way to go, and it's nice because I can put, smaller chunks in and take chunks out quarterly, and it includes. I think the rental income becomes dividends that's paid out quarterly. So that's all set up, and there's something in there. It's not the full amount that I was going to put in, but that's a good start. The other
Nice.
financing thing, I'm not really like actively looking for financing right now. I'm just more preparing and kind of getting my own finances in order. But I loved all these indie VC and Earnest Capital is the one that I've been kind of talking to people about the most, which is actually a little bit different because I was interested in working with smaller, angel investors that were interested in royalty-based financing because that feels like it's more aligned with, the whole of building a bootstrap kind of income-based business as opposed to like inflated valuation business,
Mm-hmm.
and so because I knew that that's kind of the approach that I wanted to go, I kind of ignored Indie VC and Earnest Capital. But actually, what I like about Earnest Capital is it's not actually royalty based. It's based on a profit split as the founder. So, if you make I don't know if they are trying to. How easy it is. I've just been kind of reading their documentation. I know this some of this already, but when you basically, as a founder, like there's different things you can do with the profits of your business. You can either split them up as founder salaries, or if you have more shareholders, that looks more like dividends, or you could just like keep the money and reinvest it. And so what royalty financing does is if you have income, any of that income, it has to be paid back. But because of what they're doing with founder earnings being where the split is, they don't take any money until you're more or less paying yourself. So I could keep reinvesting in the company, and then it's not needing to pay back the capital until something like dividends or finding a way to pay me. That's basically what's split, or maybe the collective founders, I'm not sure. But anyway, there's a lot more details, but that's the general idea. And so to me, that's actually even better than royalty based financing. And they kind of have a whole, their agreement is sort of, I'm not even sure that I need to work with them. Like in theory, you can take this agreement and take it to any investor, So I'm glad that they've done the legwork on this model, because I think this is one that I would consider for all this. So that's my financing update.
Awesome.
You want to talk about this what is it, documentary project that we're roped into?
Yeah, yeah. So Hacker Dojo is turning 10, and it
In
seemed like a great
October.
time.
Do you
Yeah,
remember
in
what day?
October. October 5th and 6th. Okay. Just no.
Is
Yeah.
that true? I
So
don't actually know.
yeah. So Ed is putting together this documentary with Steve and Ben. That basically is sort of like fulfilling two needs. One is like a sort of historical record and a retrospective, but then also like a sort of forward-looking advocacy sort of documentary for what it does for the community and success stories and things like this. Now, we basically just got a hold of the NAS, and we've started doing logging, which is the process by which you look through all your footage and you find what
Interesting
works.
bits.
Yeah, and then luckily the way they shot it in multicam setup, and with Resolve you can literally just like
Time
sync
sync.
them automatically.
Whoa,
Yeah,
so you can
it's
kind of like
amazing.
just watch all three views kind of at once. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, let me. I can actually show you an example. I think it's this one. Hopefully, I don't break anything. Okay, so here's an example of one of them. It's going to be a little ghetto. So you're seeing this screen. So here's this multi-clip, and this multi-clip was created by selecting multiple clips, saying create multi-clip. And down here, if we select, I think this, and hit play.
Is this tool, what is this called again? I keep forgetting.
This is called DaVinci Resolve.
Resolve.
So with here, say I want to switch the angle. Right now it's on angle 1. I can hit pause, hit 2, and it should cut it. I'm not the one editing it, so I don't remember the exact step. But that's the idea. Like here's an example of an edit that actually worked. Yeah. So it makes multicam editing real easy.
Is this scriptable?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head. I wouldn't be surprised if it was.
Just curious.
I'm not sure.
If it has a plug-in extension system that can be used.
There is a scripts workspace. I don't know what their definition of a script is exactly, but
that's something.
Yeah, but this tool's pretty awesome. It's like the canonical tool for color grading.
But then you said it sort of evolved into doing all this other stuff.
Yeah, it does like everything now.
Actually, that reminds me of maybe an update on this machine back here, which is my Amiga 4000, which I was running a video toaster on, which I was going to use for program TV and other video thingies. Just kind of as a quick aside update, because I haven't thought about that. Maybe we should put that in there as a topic. But there is a problem with the video toaster, the program, when it's run. Like it runs at a resolution or something that this monitor can't handle, and it's already a special thing because it needs a monitor that takes a VGA 15 kilohertz signal, which is not terribly common, I think, on modern displays. So since this was the best option for as a flat panel display, according to the community, I'm gonna have to get a CRT. So I finally found some on eBay that are original kind of Amiga. They take VGA in and should support all the things that it does. So I'm just waiting for that.
Awesome, nice. On the market for a CRT. I never thought I'd say that again.
Yeah, I tweeted, and I didn't have a lot of confidence anybody would have a good lead, and actually there's a bunch of good like Commodore displays on eBay, but there aren't a lot of Amiga ones. Amiga stuff's a little harder to find. What do we got? A book or an article? Do you have either of those?
Yeah. So the book that I was gonna share that I read recently, let me just grab it really quick and put it in the chat so that there is context. Oh yeah.
Somehow we're doing really good on time.
Shit. Okay, here we go. Bam. Okay, so this book is called Too Much Is Not Enough, and it's written by this Tony-nominated actor Andrew Rannells. He's most famous for originating the role of Elder Price in the Book of Mormon. Did you ever see the Book of Mormon?
No, I have not.
Yeah, but he's on other stuff, and he's just like amazing, like the most incredible singer. He's hilarious, and he's real cute, super gay. So it's a whole other thing. But yeah, so I heard he had this memoir that came out. I recently read Kate Mulgrew's memoir, which was incredible, so amazing. So I got this one, and this one is sort of set up as like the 10 years in New York before he became famous. And that kind of piqued my interest because that's not a story you commonly hear told, where like a lot of times with artists, it's like they come from a family, they have some in connection. And so from them being a non-famous person to having a hit is a relatively short time frame, but in his world, he literally landed in New York in 97 and didn't really have a successful anything until 2005.
Yeah.
And then to give it more context, he originated the role of Elder Price.
Oh, this guy. And I love him in it, so he's funny. Yeah.
So he's not the greatest writer. It's definitely written as if he's just like talking to you in a bar.
Kind of like his character. I guess I didn't for other people. Yeah. This is a picture of him.
There's some fun stories. I wouldn't say there's any insights. Like nothing he says is repeatable. Like it's like very random. But in a way, it's nice to hear because that's like, my experience in music was a lot like that. Yeah. It was just kind of, in retrospect, it seemed so random how everything happened and how I made choices. So yeah, it's worth it if you're interested, for sure.
Sounds like a good story, but memoirs feels like something you write when you're older. Although I have a friend who's working on his memoirs, and actually about Hacker Dojo too.
Oh, nice.
Because he basically lived at Hacker Dojo. All right, so I guess that's your book, or do you have an article too, or is that?
That's it for this week. I wanted to do something that wasn't technology related.
Should I do a book too that is technology related?
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
This is I mentioned this book before, but it's been sitting. I got this at a it was on clearance I got it for $2 at Half Price Books. So I like looking at old books, old computer books, usually older than this, but this one is really interesting because it's one of the so there's this idea called object-oriented programming, and we think we understand it, but there's kind of like this idea that object-oriented programming that Alan Kay thought of, at Park, and that was a very particular flavor of it. And then it had, other kind of a lineage of stuff. But what we know as object-oriented programming is a very specific approach to it, which is different than what was originally both intended, but also there's this really weird period in the 90s. And Next, this is one of the reasons why I love Next, because Steve Jobs saw a bunch of stuff at Xerox when he was at Apple, and one of them was object-oriented programming, but he didn't even really pay attention to that because he was like, oh, the graphical programming, the graphical interface. When he started Next, he basically went back to the ideas that he saw at Park, and he's like, oh, object-oriented programming. And it got some more experience with it, and then really kind of like made that basically a killer feature of the Next operating system. And a lot of those ideas are still in OS 10, and they're kind of subtle things. But this book kind of explains, because there's this whole era where people were trying to do, before web applications, before web APIs, before SOAP, a lot of what SOAP was kind of inspired by was this stuff in this book, Corba, OLE, and even OpenDoc was kind of part of this idea of, in this interpretation of objects or object-oriented programming, it's actually very aligned with how I think of components in my system, in which they're very much building blocks, and you just assemble these building blocks. Because if you think about object-oriented programming, you think, oh, that's a paradigm, that's a way to organize code. Sometimes it's a nice API for stuff. If you get a library and it's like, oh, objects, Plus, most languages have objects as like kind of a native first class thing, so you're just sort of used to them as a concept, as a native thing. But the idea of objects as building blocks was this idea that you just kind of like wire them together. And so that's the idea that and that was really only realized in designing interfaces, because that was kind of the objects. That was sort of the original React, was deciding that graphical programming interfaces can have widget-based components, and those are objects, and what that means and stuff like that. And there are a lot of interesting things in terms of how you organize and interact, like the fact that Mac development, Objective-C, you're always implementing delegates. Why are you implementing delegates? Like, that's such a, it's such a Objective-C thing. And why is that? Where did it come from? And it's kind of from this object-oriented way of thinking, or this like weird, like 90s era object-oriented thinking, where everything was an object. And, the idea that they would then, how do you get objects to interact across the network and across machines? And that's where distributed objects came from, and what Corba was trying to do. What's frustrating is that growing up, Corba was constantly made fun of by the programming community, and there's still a lot of distaste for it. Without actually knowing like what it was or how it worked. I find this a lot in tech communities a lot of the time, is like older technologies aren't actually understood, but everybody has an opinion on them. And there are valid arguments for some of the stuff that Corba was trying to do. And that's why we ended up going the other direction with REST and doing a completely stateless way of communicating. That's definitely a smarter way to think about things, but there is a benefit to this idea of distributed objects. And so that's actually kind of going into the QRPC stuff, is the higher level abstractions make it look a little bit more. I've compared it to dbus, but I'm also getting a lot of inspiration from basically 90s object-oriented programming. So that's my book.
It's awesome. Nice.
Very technical, kind of historical. Yeah, I love it because it's describing the philosophy, of objects, which is, when have you ever heard like a philosophy of objects, object-oriented programming? Like, it's just a tool, but they had context for it. They had a direction that they're taking it, which was also a different direction than Alan Kay had intended, I believe. So it's just interesting how these things evolve. Anyway, that's my book.
Philosophy. That makes me think quite a bit. Like, the first thing that comes to mind when I think of an object, I think of state and methods, right? And so that's not necessarily a philosophy. That's a description of something.
Well,
so I'm really intrigued by that.
What's interesting is object-oriented programming usually means very different things to different people. For example, you just said you think of state and methods. For some people, object-oriented is very much tied to the idea of class hierarchy, which is one of the least useful paradigms and one of the most problematic versions of object-oriented programming. But I think that became a generally accepted concept of objects, which is state and methods. And that's why Go's version of object-oriented programming is just structs that have methods.
I love it. Yeah.
So it's really pretty cool to see the evolution of objects too, and just sort of like the different interpretations over the years. It's really fascinating. But I just watched another interesting thing. Was I watched a talk by I thought I'd seen most talks by Steve Jobs by now, but there was one that he gave somewhere, maybe it was MIT, and he was talking about Next. He was working at Next, and they had just pivoted away from their initial strategy, which was one of the most well-known, which was like they're making a computer for education, for students, for teachers, for academics. That was their initial like niche that they thought they could sell to, and then that was wrong. Let's see if I can at least pull it up. Oh yeah, Steve Jobs' MIT class, what he learned after he was fired from Apple. I'll just put this on the screen. I don't need to play it.
Awesome.
And it looks like this. And one of the interesting things that he said was that they were pivoting. Oh God, I almost want to find, but basically they were like, actually they realized what's so great is the Next operating system and the fact that it's object-oriented and how that decreases development time to like a third of what it was for the industry standard. And he hypothesized that that is going to be huge, working with large companies to make custom software for them, or to give them the tools for them to make custom software. I find that really interesting because that's a lot of how I think about this tool, is that it's a tool for making tools. It's a tool to make it easy to build systems. And that's kind of, he even used the words that I said. He said, he called Next an object-oriented development, or, what did he said? He called Next, he was like, it's more than an operating system, it's an operating environment. And I've literally come to that conclusion as a way of thinking about this stuff. And so it was just really interesting to hear him kind of thinking similarly to me and about some ideas that I'd never heard him talk about before, specific to Next. So that's another
That's really awesome.
Little bit.
Love it.
But we're almost up to 50 minutes, so I guess what else do we want to do? Next targets for next week? Nobody said anything in chat, so I don't really know if...
I do have like a random thing I wanted to just tie together
Yeah.
because I mean this is unrelated to like anything, but it's just I don't know, whatever, it's cool. So Notion is cool because you start to think of just data as like databases, like everything's a database. And then internally it's kind of just like a bunch of rows, which you can model easily as like a list of objects, right? Which is like, okay, cool, that's awesome. Then you talked about this run kit thing and you scrolled down, and the first example was like data visualization,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it was just a bunch of stuff, right? So I'm working on sort of like a data visualization kind of problem right now. So I'm scraping data from Twitch and like image data, and I'm going to do sentiment analysis. And if I find anything interesting or come up with something, I'll submit it as a paper to some conference we have at work. But I was looking around at all these visualization tools, and then randomly on Hacker News, I came up against this new thing called New Shell. Have you ever heard of this?
You shall.
Yeah, NU Shell.
Oh, NU.
And it's this idea. The really novel part to me is that, for example, LS returns your directory as tabular data. So it's this interesting sort of idea of like, what if everything worked off of that paradigm of everything's tabular data? How far can you go with that?
Well, structured data.
Yeah, well, structured.
But
Yeah,
you visualize
exactly.
it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. It's got some basically kind of SQL-like semantics in their piping. Yeah, this is great. I've seen a lot of experiments like this, and alternative shells and stuff. And this is the first one that's actually kind of interesting to me.
Totally. And so I think about the problem space of like the what you're building, and that sort of like integration, that point is still going to be like something to work on. And if systems were kind of normalized in a way like this, or if they had really obvious interfaces.
Yeah, I mean, I remember talking a lot to people about using JSON as a interchange between piped commands and what that would look like and how you could implement it. And I feel like potentially this is doing more or less the same things. It doesn't necessarily need to be, but it's structured data. Like JSON is just an implementation detail. And so I remember having thoughts about this too on some of the hard problems that I don't remember what they are, but I'm sure if I were to play with this, I'd think of them. There was some stuff like, how does this work with things that aren't providing structured data, Because you can imagine LS, this is a custom implementation. It's not just doing an LS in Bash and then formatting it. So in order to output structured data like this, the programs have to be aware, or you have to somehow structurize program output. So that's one of the things that, but this great experiment. I could imagine maybe something like this being integrated with the tool, although
For sure.
It's interesting because, is this paradigm any more effective than just working with an interactive REPL for a programming language, like a scripting language? Maybe, because I definitely feel like there is a difference between, like, Shell historically has been designed for a little bit of ease of use, right? Like things like, you don't have to care about quotes if you don't want to a lot of the time. You don't put commas between, it's less verbose. Like it's made that for the activity of an operator who's typing a lot. But at the same time, those come with a lot of interesting problems like how do you group things with spaces and divide arguments. There's in that ecosystem, there's a lot of problems that come with that ease. So those are all the things that I think about with this, but this is a really good find. All right.
Nice.
Is that, oh, we haven't done what we're going to do next week.
Oh, shit. Okay. Well,
should we do that?
For me, the documentary, we're going to be putting together the rough assembly, which is just the process of finding, you've logged all the footage, you found all the good clips. Now you look for all just the great pieces, just regardless of the story, throw them on the timeline, just get everything great that you have in there, and then kind of start to whittle away. Because specifically with documentaries are a type of piece that are really created in the editing room.
Mm-hmm.
So the workflow sort of reflects that. It's not like you come down with a vision, unless you may with a propaganda piece. You can likely do it that way, but usually it's iterative.
Let's see. You haven't worked on a documentary, or did you work on a documentary?
No, I haven't. Mark has done a few.
Oh, he has done some.
Yeah, and he's the one who's actually doing the work.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, for me, I think I want to keep working on the extension because it has a lot of momentum, and I want to get it to the point where it is usable enough as the original prototype. Because now it's sort of like the pieces are there, but it just needs to like fine tune and wire things up. And once I have that, then I can get back to the point of having this, which is prototyping concepts, like what components look like. For example, one of the last ones that I was working on, which I don't show, let's see, is it in here? But this system, one of the first class citizens has to be authentication and user accounts, because it's all about integrating with other systems, and that creates all kinds of limitations. If this then that only lets you have one account per type of service, that's a complex problem in itself. There are different kinds of ways to authenticate, OAuth, secrets, stuff like that. So I'm basically designing the system to have all that. When I say native, that's kind of the thing, is I don't like, what I want to do is try and do everything as components. And so there would be like some type of authentication or a component to authenticate with GitHub or something like that. And then once you have that component, you can use that API, and maybe there's an interface or a button on the component here that you click to log in and manage the credentials, like reset or relog in or whatever. And I originally imagined that as like maybe part of the system. It's like, oh, there's a separate UI, separate area where you manage your accounts and you manage your links or whatever you want to call them. And maybe it will at some point, but I like this idea of how much of the system can you model within its own paradigm. So I'm going to be exploring that once I have a working version of the editor here in VS Code. And so I think by next week I should have a working version, given this progress and momentum.
Cool.
I guess that's it. What else?
Just probably going to be streaming the editing process whenever we hit editing.
Oh yeah, you're doing that this weekend?
Yeah, I don't know if he's going to be able to hit editing this weekend. He might finish logging today and start tomorrow. I don't know. But at some point, we're going to start streaming it just as like an experiment. I've actually started streaming myself doing music. And it's so interesting how It's like when something is observed, it changes it, you know, and it's the same thing with how you think creatively. It's like very different.
Yeah, there's
And I'm
certain things I
usually
can't do
very,
on stream,
yeah,
and there's certain things I
um,
can do even better on stream.
exactly, right? It's so interesting. So exploring that space is very, very interesting and fun. You know, to be sitting in front of a DAW and to feel uncomfortable is kind of fun. Like I haven't felt that in a long time. To be like, oh God, I better do something great, you know. But also kind of designing like what I'm gonna do when I sit down.
Yeah,
It makes you more thoughtful of
yeah,
that. Like I'm gonna work on this and this and this.
yeah.
Um,
It sort of forces you
so
to, because you usually have an idea of how long you're going to stream. And so then that makes you think about more or less like what can you get done in that time. You know,
mhm,
you can use it for time boxing, or you can use it as a mechanism to like chunk and figure out like what can you get done in one sitting or whatever. So
mhm,
it's a helpful structure. That's what I found.
yeah, sweet.
All right,
Well,
I guess
that's
that's
it.
it. Let me put up this cool graphic I made.
Yeah.
And I guess we'll talk to everybody next week. Goodbye.
See ya.